All right. Well, okay.
Cold start.
There's a question.
Thomas's famous cold starts.
Yeah, there's a question I'm going to get to, but it might take me a little bit to get there. So I remember I was 12 years old in our Sunday school class, and we were doing a little field trip. And the Sunday school leader, his name was Chad, and for my entire life up until that moment, I called him Mr. His last name. What I found is that there was this moment where I was trying to figure out, like, what are we doing next? I wasn't sure where to go, and I was trying to be helpful. And so instinctively, I say, "Hey, Chad, are we going to do this or that?" And then he responds, and then he seemed like he didn't think anything of it. But in the very moment I said his name, Chad, I had a whole flurry of emotions because that was the first time I called an adult by their first name.
You thought you might get in trouble?
Well, yeah, I was like...
It's very disrespectful.
The first part was like, that felt wrong, but good.
Hey, listen, Don has been to those churches where you're treading a real thin ice there, my friend.
Well, I was like, that felt really good. And
you called her grandma your whole life, and suddenly you're like, "Hey, Esther, how are you doing today?" You're like,
well, actually, we were good with the first name. You just had to put Mr. in front of it.
There you go. Oh, that's true. That's true.
See,
that's
true. You could call him Mr. Chad. That was good.
Yeah, that would have been a good bridge.
That was too much.
A good bridge.
Yeah. Now you're
Well, because I was afraid.
So he was disrespectful.
In that same moment, I was worried, like, have I potentially caused a future mutiny? Because I with everyone around called him by his first name, and has he lost all respect in the classroom now?
Thanks to you, yes.
And so that my question is, at what point can you start calling people by their first name as an adult?
When I can't pronounce their last name, I'm always on a first name basis with them, without a doubt. Like someone will say, "What is his last name?" I don't know. I'm on a first name basis with him.
Yeah, couldn't tell you if you asked.
Because it's something I can pronounce if I try.
Yeah, that's a good call. This is why he's on today's show.
There you go. Well, but
wisdom pearls like that will get you everywhere.
It actually is funny because I suppose nowadays there's I've noticed people who are 50 and younger, they don't like being called Mr. anything. They like Mr. They like their name.
Right.
And another point, when you call them sir, they go, "You don't have to call me sir."
That's true.
Yeah. Or my dad's called sir, but not me. Yeah.
Right.
I get it all.
So call me old fashioned, but I look forward to my future kids' friends calling me Mr. and Sir.
Yeah. Okay.
I look forward to that.
I think we always like to hear it because that shows mannerism. It shows respect.
That's fair.
But when you grow up and you got other adults doing it, you go, "Come on, man. You don't need to call me sir. It's okay. So you don't have to call me Mr. by my last name."
What's that age range? When is it okay?
I'm sorry, but there is no rule on that whatsoever. Yeah. You have to do it on a case by case basis.
It has to be earned.
Yeah. You have to go, "Okay, I can't do it with him." But then the next guy, "Okay, I can do it with him."
That's fair.
Well, it's cultural, right?
It is.
The challenge in America is that we're like a billion different cultures.
Yes.
So you find out this girl who grew up in Texas, she's like, "You are a real scumbag. I can't believe you talk to grandma like that."
Yeah.
And then the next person is from another location, Manhattan, perhaps. And it's like, we're all chummy. You're like, "Really? You talk to your great grandma like that?" It's always easier when you notice in other cultures. So I was talking to this African brother of mine, and he was a refugee in Europe at the time, and he goes, "Yeah, we always what you just said, we always put a something on the front." And of course, in Christian circles, it's brother something, sister something. So that's always a safe bet. I mean, honestly, if you were to create a new Christian subculture, it's like, just so you're remind yourself, that's sister so-and-so, that's brother so-and-so. Of course, you and I grew up in environments where everyone was brother because you didn't know how to say their name correctly.
That's right, brother.
But this African guy, he explained to me, he was like, everybody, you show respect to everybody by giving them a title of some sort. Even if you're talking to a wee child, you're going to have a way of saying something to them. But or it could be a somewhat friendly nickname, like you call her your grandma, even though she's not your biological grandma. but the easy default would be sister. So you would never go, oh yeah, old Jane, she works with the kids. She's with the kids back there. And you're like, please call her Miss Jane. Just let her know that you really respect who she is in Christ. So, but it is cultural. There's no right or wrong. I do think you ruined that one group. But that group, let's face it, was a bunch of hooligans that was beyond repair. I don't,
Could be.
It was inevitable. Eventually, they would be spoiled.
Well, thank you for letting me unburden that this morning.
See how he softens
so much
the
better
blow.
about himself now.
He softens the blow with these, these cold starts, and now you just want to spill the beans on anything. Whatever you got, Don, you're coming in hot.
Welcome to another episode of The Sage. This is my camera. That's our camera. That's
His, mine, and ours. There is a show about this.
Yeah, I think we all get a camera to ourselves, actually.
Yes.
So welcome to another episode of The Sage. I am joined by none other than the Silver Fox himself.
Cue background music of cheers and applause.
That's right. Do you have a background preferred song?
I would go "We Are the Champions," but
We can probably make that happen.
I'm a
Paul?
sucker for anything by Queen.
Paul said we can make that happen.
Yeah, all right.
So,
We are the funny story. We will do occasional segues, and then Paul will later hate them and cut it out. So this one is gonna die on the cutting floor. But Booger McFarland, he's an announcer on ESPN, and I love this guy. He lives in the Tampa area. You probably seen his face, or he announces a lot
He
of
actually
football
played
games.
for
That's right. He's a Bucks guy. That's
Yeah.
right. So you would appreciate locally, right?
Yes, yes.
But Booger, he talks about there was a team they were doing horrible, and then they finally won a game, and they had this bravado all about them all of a sudden. He goes, and this guy's a very successful guy on every front, right? He goes, listen, man, I remember we were young, and we were like 0-9, and we finally won a game, and that night at the pizza parlor, we played "We Are the Champions" like 10 times in a row, and we were celebrating. So there's something about that song where you're like, all of a sudden, you're a new team, you're a new person. So I feel like we are the champions.
I like it. Well, Robert, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And we mustn't forget the smartest man in the room, Paul.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul.
The
Thank you,
man
Paul.
who picks up the pieces.
That's right.
That we just leave.
I so thought that was a lead in for me, but thank you, Paul.
Well, now I feel a little bit sheepish.
Just call me Mr. Don
Yeah, I
from
was
now
gonna say,
on.
I was
Okay?
gonna say, you're gonna have to go back to Mr. Don now. You just drop points.
Thank you for actually taking time out of your day and being here with us. It means a lot.
Thank you.
So we
Thank you
got
very much.
Don because we refer to this as Sage. Don, whether you like it or not, you're gonna have to live with this title for today at least. A sage, somebody who has, I don't want to say any wear in the tires. I just want to say some life experiences. And specifically, we admire people who have invested in other people, right?
That's right.
So somebody who's got a few years, they've seen things come and go, and they have a track record of other people being encouraged by them. By the way, I have quite a few Mr. Don stories, although I've never in my life called him Mr. Don. And I don't feel really comfortable starting now.
Hey, we're on a first name basis.
I have quite a few, but let me start by saying, are you more of the IHOP guy or the Waffle House guy?
Well, I have a men's group and we meet at IHOP.
You're IHOP.
So if I was to say Waffle House, you would say, why don't you guys meet there?
That's right.
So I'm going to just stick with IHOP.
Well, and
But-
you do know, so I'm the bridge generation. I'm Gen X, but you are correct. If you would have said the alternative than a lot of the other generations, the first instinct is to be contrarian. And to think about why you should be doing the other one.
Right,
So IHOP it is.
IHOP it is.
And
yeah.
you find that's kind of a bit of a sweet spot. And you specifically you're with men, and you typically are early in the morning. Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct. 7 o'clock.
7 a.m. That's
Which
when
means you got to get up early.
spiritually
You got to
speaking,
drive.
That's when people's spiritual juices are flowing, and they're like, "All right, this is going to be good."
Yes, yes. So what we hope, anyway.
Also, I guess you think in terms of it's pre-work for a lot of guys. Catch them early in the morning.
Right.
It's one of those times where basically, if you say you didn't make it, it's like, well, because you slept in. It wasn't because you had to be somewhere. You could have met me at 7 and been somewhere else by 8, but no, you simply. So you're kind of lowering the bar, making it easier to participate.
Yeah, yes.
And then hopefully making it more challenging to be in the life of Christ, but challenging not being dumb little roadblocks like it's a time of day when people can't get together.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
So what does IHOP look like at 7 a.m. with these guys?
That was my question.
Well, there's not as many customers. That's always good.
Yeah.
That's always good.
Yeah.
But we have had people come over after we've done our thing and said, hey, I got this going on in my life, pray about it or stuff. So, when you're in a public place, you never know who's listening.
Yeah.
You never know who's listening.
Yeah.
So, anyway, yeah,
there's a bit of modeling going on, even if you're not overtly seeking that. I mean, the waitress hopefully notices that you're not snarky. You're genuinely good people, and she probably wishes there was more customers like you guys around. Other customers, if they're looking around the room and they're like, you know what? If my car broke down at 2 a.m, I think I would want dudes like that showing up, right? There's something that they pick up on of like, there's a goodness about it, I think.
Well, we've had people come over and say, hey, we're new to this area. And, because of what you said, because they see what's going on. So they go, well, these guys are probably not going to rob us.
Right. That's right.
Probably not going to,
A lot of thieves don't bother to meet at 7 a.m. at an IHOP
and talk about the Bible.
Enjoy
not going to happen.
That's fair. Well, Don, would you tell us a little bit about yourself? We already know your name. So tell us, when were you born?
Well, I was born August 22nd, 1955.
55.
So, quite a few years back.
This is a big year for Don.
Big year. One of the things I'll say, I grew up in the 60s, and, we look at today as living in crazy times. The 60s was crazy times. We had the President of the United States assassinated. A few years later, his brother, and of course, Martin Luther King Jr., all were assassinated. We had a war going on, and we talk about how divided our country is today. Very divided. Some people were, we should be in this war in Vietnam, and there was a lot that were protesting against it. So, in a lot of ways, it's just different today, but a lot of the same factors play in. And one of the other things about the 60s is it was also known as a time of sexual revolution. And the truth of the matter is it was a time when it was unrestrained porn. And the factors of that play out today very strong, very strong. And back then you would have to go to some shady store to get a pornography magazine, but very available. And then others, today it's just a click of your smartphone.
That's true.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of young men and of all ages that are actually addicted to pornography. And the effects in our society is more than people say. So that was born out of the 60s. And we're reaping what that meant in the seeds that were sown during then. So
that's really interesting.
Pretty turbulent times in a lot of ways. But that was the world that I lived in then. And again, in a lot of ways, it reflects what we're dealing with today.
That's true.
I do think that's interesting, though, but because we often we ask the era that folks are coming from, what they've seen, and I think that each generation, it is almost comical how every presidential election, everyone's like, man, if we don't get this one right, this is the worst ever. We're on the cusp of disaster, right? And you're like,
We've been on the cusp for
exactly.
Been on the cusp for 70 plus years.
Exactly. I would like to think that there are some sage Christians out there who are not get sucked into the drama and be like, you know what? It's funny you should mention that, because for 70 years in a row, we're always on the cusp of disaster. Also, each generation, even in church leadership, you have folks who are like, man, you don't understand. Nowadays, it's really tough because the world's crazy and their culture's gone the wrong way and blah, blah, blah. But you're exactly right. I'm a little younger than you, but I can remember
There's a lot
era.
of people that qualify for that last statement. Okay,
well, hopefully most
ahead.
of the listeners, most of the listeners. But yeah, you talk about JFK being assassinated, then Bobby, and then MLK, which, by the way, this Monday we're celebrating is MLK.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
But when you think about that kind of environment, and then you mentioned what was dubbed the sexual revolution, and usually history books and our culture in general would look at it as, well, yeah, before that sexual revolution, we were like an oppressed.
That's right.
We were all pilgrims. We had to hide in our bedrooms because sex wasn't even talked about, and you're like, well, actually, it was kind of nice, actually, because Pandora's box got opened, and now here we are, march forward another 60 years, and you're like, thanks a lot, revolution.
Right.
Exactly. Are women really better off? Are they having a better time? Is their environment
Nobody asked
good?
that question. Nobody ever asked,
nobody wants to
are
be
we
the kind of-
better off because of giving the freedom?
Right.
They never asked that question, because if they did, they would see that 56% of marriages break up because of pornography.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, you don't hear that
Right.
because it's never talked about.
And pornography came up a lot in one of our previous conversations. And I think if you look at that alone, that's probably a pretty good focal point in terms of so it's a lot more fun to be in a marriage now, knowing that your husband's hooked on porn. It's I'm sure it's a real treat, right? And now increasingly women also, statistically, are much more.
Right.
I'm sort of, again, in that bridge generation where, as I was a child, I was like, I don't think any of the ladies around here are hooked on that. And I was probably more right.
Oh, yeah.
And now more and more, I'm like, oh, dang, we have turned another corner here. But yeah, that Pandora's box gets open, and then all the things we as Americans tout as we're big on freedom, freedom, freedom. And that also, of course, translates into our spiritual walk or our view of God. We view him as, you know what, he's just trying to repress the heck out of us. But we don't understand, well, freedom without any parameters is not a freedom. It's actually just utter chaos. So you can think of any, and this is sort of where philosophy feeds into understanding, but you think of any, let's say freedom, you're on a sports field and you have the freedom to just improvise the rules as we go along. You're like, that's going to be a really crappy game.
Yeah.
Or it's like, yeah, out of bounds is no longer out of bounds, or you're allowed to have 15 players and I can have 8. And it's just, it becomes really stupid. So in Christ, we learn that freedom is what you thought was oppressive guardrails designed for your own well-being, and you stiff-necked look up at God and go, I want freedom. I want to do it my way. And he's like, yeah, multiple sexual partners. Your partner's actually hooked on the visual images of things they've seen. Really? Yeah. Is this so this is your improvement on my idea? Because my idea, I try to be so clear with you guys, but you're like, no, freedom. Right. Freedom at a stupidity level.
It's interesting. Even in my experience, I recognize I've seen people who have the unrestrained, I'll do whatever I want. And it's not just in the sexual realm, but it's many other realms. And it seems like inevitably every single time it ends in burdened loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Yeah.
Very good point.
It's sad. And it's interesting because I guess I hadn't really connected like, oh yeah, I suppose the sexual revolution, like what we experience now in our world, is in some ways birthed from that movement.
Yes.
But certainly that movement was birthed from a different movement.
Yes.
And so it's just we keep going down the line, right?
We do. We do.
In rebellion to or emphasizing of what was, I suppose.
That's right. That's right.
It's very interesting. So those things were going on during your young adult years. Tell me about your young adult years specifically. What were those like for you?
When I was 12, my parents were divorced, and my grandfather stepped up. Actually, at 5, this story goes to 12, but he stepped up and really became a male figure in my life, and he took me on as if I was his son, and so when I was about 12, we actually lived with him for a time period and went to church with him. And I saw Christianity, and I saw what being a man of God was about in him. He was humble. He had a business. He was a contractor. And if something wasn't right and it was his fault, he paid for it to be corrected. He didn't try to, take advantage of people. And anyway, I came to Christ at 12, and it literally did change the way I thought. And what I didn't know was this was going to be preparation for the following years from 7th grade to 12th that I would go to 6 different schools because of moving. And so the last move when I was in the 10th grade was to San Diego, California. And we had always got connected with a church. And so we just didn't connect with the church there. And I finally found one had a youth group, and I thought, man, this is really cool. And they actually had a house. They actually had a house where you could go hang out on the weekends. And I thought, man, this is great.
Yeah.
And so so I go. So I forgot what we were doing, probably playing a video game or something. And when the guys go, hey, I'm going to step out back. So I said, okay. Yeah, so I went out there with him. Well, he was going out there to smoke a joint.
Oh.
So I found that the slippery slope pretty much began at that point. And from that point forward, I just changed the way I thought. Partying and doing what I want. A lot of the things you said, freedoms that you think you're gaining are actually things that will have dominion over you. But anyway, so that went on through my 20s. And at the end of my 20s, at 29, leading up to something you're going to probably ask me about decisions.
Yeah.
But anyway, a friend asked us to go to church with them. Now, I have a confession to make. The only time I'd ever been asked to go to church was for weddings and funerals prior to that. And I said, yeah, okay. Why not? And what I didn't know was that decision had been set up by a lot of things that God had already been doing in my life that I didn't even recognize. But one thing I did recognize when my son was born and I'm holding him, I realized this little guy is totally dependent on me. And it made me think for the first time, what would that look like if he was like me? It made me think, okay, maybe I need to take a little deeper look at what I find, important. And so also 1 year later, my grandfather passed away. And so that had a big impact on me. And again, some reflection. So I think those things that God was doing was preparing me to say yes to that. What I didn't know is it was going to be the best, it was going to lead me to the best decision I ever made.
Yeah.
And that's a story inside of itself. But just to narrow it down, they had an altar call, and my wife elbows me. She never elbowed me before and didn't even do it hard, but that elbow went through the skin, through the ribs, straight to my heart. And I get emotional sometimes talking about it. The amazing thing about things that impact your life, when you talk about them, the emotion that you carried at that time oftentimes comes back full strength. She said 2 words, "Let's go." And I found myself in front of a church with tears in my eyes, talking to a pastor who in turn turned around afterwards and said, "Hey, we want you guys to come greet him." So now this is a church full of people. By the way, it was Easter.
Descending upon you.
Yeah, they're all in line to shake my hand, and I'm like, wow. But, I think about the fact that decisions that we make, the good ones and the bad ones, they're always preceded by decisions we made prior to that.
That's right.
Often what we would call little decisions, not big thing, they lead to the big things. And even sometimes, particularly when it's a bad decision, we don't consider it a bad thing. We kind of rationale it off and say, well, I kind of screwed that one up, but, life goes on,
Right. True. And it's interesting. So the next question brought to you by my psychologist friend. The best and worst decisions you've ever made. It sounds like you already mentioned like that would be the best decision was that going up to that altar call and starting your life, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was all in. It was the beginning of a lot of changes in my life.
Yeah.
People thought I was a stutterer. I wasn't a stutterer, but when I got to a part of the sentence when I'd usually interject a cuss word, a red flag would go off, so I had to rethink my next word.
Oh man, again, I'm dating myself, but a lot of Mel Tillis concepts are flowing through my head right now.
Yeah, people go like, "What is wrong with this guy?" I have to interject another adjective because my adjective before
was not good.
Yeah, it was not good.
So in that venue, that coming forward, that was the peak. But I love what you're saying is that there's all these little things that are leading up to that, and in the present moment, you don't recognize all those little moments. You don't think, you might not think much about them, but in hindsight, you're like, you know what? That got me ready for that.
Yeah, that
and
makes
for
sense.
better or for worse, that was where I took the wrong turn because of stupidity just before, or that actually set me up for, wait a second, something's got to change.
That's right.
This life without God is not happening. It's just not getting anywhere.
It's interesting we're talking about this. At one point, someone told me we're always 3 decisions away from doing something we never thought we would.
That's right.
And
I was thinking more like half a decision, but yeah, I'd go with 3. But if this is your psychologist friend, I don't want to rebuttal him. Backdrop. So Thomas Sposley has a psychologist friend. We've never met this guy. Paul, have you ever met this guy? So there's a fictitious character in his head who's his psychologist friend. Now I think he's out there, but I never met him. Right, but it is true. He does come up with some humdinger questions.
He does. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he throws some curveballs out there. But I guess if that's what you got to do for a living, you learn do body blows on the patients and kind of soften them up, and then you're like, whoa, I didn't see that one coming.
It's called meat tenderizer.
Yeah.
Something that Robert mentioned that I'd often tell people is, when we look at where we are and we are willing to go back, we can see that God was working. He was always in the background working because we figure this. If this wouldn't have happened, which doesn't have to be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. Guess what? This next thing wouldn't have happened.
True.
Yeah.
And then this wouldn't have happened and I wouldn't be where I am right now. So when we connect the dots, we always see God was working. We just didn't think he was. And it is hard to see at the time, but it's important that we take the time to look back and connect those dots because there's where we get our encouragement. God was working all the time, even in the places where we thought life couldn't get any worse than it is, and he was working.
That's true. Now, with regard to the worst decision that you've ever made, would you say it was that moment when you walked out and your friend was smoking a joint, or would you link it to a different moment?
I would link it to a different moment. And this is going to be one in which I think there'll be some people go, really? But when I was married, there was a lot of little decisions that I made. I can remember a good friend of mine talking to me, and he goes, "So you're not going to change? We're still going to hang out, right?" And I go, "Of course." I mean, And over a period of time, I began to make decisions that actually put my friends ahead of my wife. Now, if you'd asked me that, I'd said, no, not true. But one time we were going to do something, and a friend of mine contacted me, and that I'm going to really date myself, which is okay because I already said when I was born. So why would that matter at this point?
Yeah.
This generation's horrible
He
at math,
actually got the brand new Nintendo, which was now going to be a rival of Atari.
64, Nintendo 64, or is this okay?
No, I don't know. Too far back. I just
yourself.
know Nintendo. But anyway, and so I told my wife, I said, "Hey, I'm going to go over there for about an hour and hang out with him, and I'll be back." And 3 hours passed. I didn't contact her or anything, and then I went back home. So why do I think that was such a bad decision? Because there'll be people that'll say, "Really? That's it?" Look, I've made a lot of bad decisions. So the reason why that one is important for you to point out is because I saw the hurt on her face. When I came back. So I realized that this was a ton of decisions that had led up to that moment. Now, I didn't wake up that morning and go, "Gosh, I think I'll hurt my wife today." But what I didn't realize was there was a ton of decisions that had been made prior to that made that easy to do. And so, some people might say, "Man, that's not such a big deal." But it's because we have a tendency to look past our faults and rationalize them. I can't take back the pain that I saw. Tissues
From nowhere.
The pain that I saw, but I did know that the truth was I'd lost some of her trust, and I'd also lost the fact that she now didn't think she was number one in my life.
Right, that's right.
She was not, because my friends were number one.
Yeah.
So, I could pick a ton of bad decisions, but when I think about it, it's sometimes those that we don't think are so big that are huge.
Yeah.
That's true.
And that one will be easy to rationalize away and say, well, it's really not that big a deal. But
I didn't realize what time it was.
Right, exactly.
The game was like really cool. And next thing I knew, 3 hours passed. I apologize.
If it was somebody else and they're like, "Hey, Robert and Don, help me list 20 lame excuses for why it's okay," we could help him come up with lame excuses. But you knew in your heart that was...
That's right.
That was a big...
That's right.
That was just a... And I do think we do glamorize the, well, I've never gotten drunk and wrapped a car around a tree. I've never been pulled over for DUI or some of those kind of big things. But I like what you caught the Spirit telling you, because I think there's other people out there who probably have those seemingly little moments, and it's easy for them to tell the Holy Spirit, like, shut up, it ain't no big deal. I mean, there's people out there murdering people. Who are you to tell me that that's a big deal? And you're like, but what you defined some of what was going on, like behind the little mini story of what's happening that day. It's like, no, that was a moment of, I lost trust. That was a moment of somebody thought I had reprioritized what was most important to me. And that, it could come up at anything. It could be for a kid, it could be a ball game. And for them, it was like the biggest ball game since Super Bowl was invented. and you just somebody chose to not show up, and they're like, well, dang, like that's when I found out. Yeah, I mean, in their minds, they were like, you might as well have written a treatise on him. Doesn't love me, didn't care enough to change his plans, didn't bother to show up. And you're like, well, I didn't do all that. I just didn't make the dang ball game. But in that kid's heart, he's like, no, this is what really happened. If you knew me at all, you would have known that was the biggest thing that had ever happened to me. And there was never going to be something that was going to be more meaningful. Graduating from med school was going to be a pittance compared to that day at the ball, right?
That's true.
And so for them, that was a big moment.
Yeah.
And those moments come along all the time, and you tend to not hear people be honest about those kinds of decisions. Or to the outsider, it might say, well, that doesn't seem like a real big deal. It's like, or somebody might say, they're in an argument with a spouse, and they say a certain something, and you're like, well, gosh, you weren't like cussing them out. And it's like, yeah, but if you'd have been in the room, the tone of my voice, it might as well have been like a nuclear bomb. And I can't really convey because you weren't there. But trust me, when I said that to her in that moment, I might as well have set off a nuclear bomb. So it's a hard question. I'm glad it's in there. But thank you, Don, for being honest about having to reflect on that. Because I do hope that there are other people, and they're about to go gaming with their buddy, or they're about to go on a stupid hunting trip. Americans, seriously, have you been to Publix? Have you seen the butcher section? Do you not know there's lots of meats already available? Seriously, 3 days away from your beautiful wife. I don't know. I'm just not saying it. Or maybe once a year. Come on, man. You're not that good of a hunter. Let's get real.
Honestly, even for people listening, even for me, gosh, my wife and I just talked about yesterday how bad I am at planning dates. So it's honestly very humbling for me, because it's like I really got to improve in this right now.
Well, full disclosure, Thomas's wife is a flight attendant, so you have challenging schedules, and you have to.
Are you trying to rationalize this for me?
No, not at all. Dude, you're a starry son of a gun. Let's just be clear. Let's just put that out there. But because it's a challenging schedule. Yeah. You could tell yourself, well, it's just so complicated, I can't figure it out.
Right.
But all of us at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, but there's little something. You're either communicating to that loved one of yours, you're my number one priority. Everything else I'll make work. But I will figure this out. I will. If the date night is an important thing, we're going to figure it out, even if we have crazy schedules.
Yeah.
Or something as little as, it might not be a big deal for other people to hang out at certain times with certain other friends. But in this moment, for me, it was a bad move. And I have to recognize that. And that's the kind of thing that, again, you have to be able to listen to the Holy Spirit, and you have to be around other people who are also doing that. Because we don't have a Bible that is a rule book that says, don't ever hang out with your friends and do video games. It's like, well, it's not that. There's nothing wrong with video games, and there's nothing wrong with friends. But in that moment, you got to be able to pick up on the fact that it's a big deal. It's a big deal to this person.
That's true.
Well, whether it's your spouse, or whether it's your kids, or anybody else that you love deeply, you can tell them you love them, but it's what you do that exemplifies that.
Yeah.
The little things.
Yes.
And it's interesting because we've been kind of hovering around it, but that's kind of the basis of our topic today. It's the little decisions that lead to big moments in our life. And I'm curious, especially through the framework of the group that you've run for years now, how have you seen those little decisions play out in your life, and then the people who are attending these groups for you?
Well, I think we have a tendency to always look for big results. And as men, we always look for results. But, I truly believe this. If God was to reveal to us all the people that we have impacted their lives, all the people that we have encouraged, helped along the way, we would realize just how significant our life is. And so, when when Brandon was little and we played baseball and I coached, I have had kids that are now adults that have come up to me and said, "Hey, I just want to thank you." I had one that that comes to this church, and he sent me a picture of a little certificate that I'd given him because he had a great ball game. As parents, the things that my kids remember is my attendance, more so than anything else. And so, guys in this group, I've heard some of them say, "Hey, man, you really helped me." But the truth of the matter is, God's the one that does all the helping. God's the one that works in their lives. We're just an instrument that He uses. That's it.
So, I mean, that's incredibly humbling for me to hear that coming from you, especially because, at least in the time that I've known you, you've been a fantastic example. Someone that I want to emulate when I'm.
Well, I hope you
getting
have
there.
more hair.
They'll have figured that out by then. Science is going to have all these guys.
Well, I said that when I was in my 30s, and it didn't happen. Okay, Robert. They're always saying, "Hey, try this; it's going to work."
That's true.
I tried it; it didn't work.
We
okay?
grew up watching the Jetsons. We're supposed to all have flying cars by now, and hair loss is certainly not supposed to be a problem. But
yeah, well, here we are.
Here we are. Reality, what they said.
I suppose it's because of what you said. I think as men, we can look for results, and we're very maybe material minded. Like I see the evidences around your life, and I say He did a lot of really great stuff. But here we are talking about it, and you're saying God did some really great stuff, and I was there, and that for me is almost a little bit jarring because it's like, how come shouldn't we take some credit for it? How does that play out? Does that make sense? I don't mean to blabber.
It does. But here's the thing, is that there's nothing that I do well for God that He doesn't do through me. Give you an example. We were actually having an event here at the church. It was a men's group. And I get a text, and it was, "Hey, my son who's in the hospital is not going to make it. He wants to marry the gal that he was engaged to right there. Would you come and do it?" Wow. And so I left the men's group. I'm driving in the car, and I said, "Lord, I have nothing. I don't even know what will I say. How does this even come down? I don't know." But I found that when I go to God and I say, "God, I got nothing for this moment. I don't have wisdom for it. I don't have words for it. I have no idea what to say." I'm always amazed at how often He comes through. And my daughter, who knew them, came, and so that was good. That was really good. But I honestly did not know what to say at all. And yet He provided the words. And so here's what I know about God. Is He going to get the glory for that one? Absolutely. I can't take any glory for it because I had nothing.
Right.
So
He doesn't have to worry about sharing that credit with you, does He?
Right, exactly. So when we rely on our own resources, or when we say, like you were saying, "Well, hey, I'm doing pretty good here. Hey, I hope you're noticing that, because I'm making a difference down here." And then you really realize that without Him, you got nothing.
Yeah.
You got nothing. Because without Him, we're all self-centered and we're all selfish. Yeah. And everything we do is always about what's in it for me.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and sadly that carries over into our so-called service for the Lord, right? So
that's right.
It's such an ingrained, and in our culture it's probably up on steroids, because we're very much do, accomplish, get credit. we're if ever the epitome of the culture, that's us. So we're steeped in it. So it's so counter to our culture to go, you know what? If they left that room and thought, wow, that Don, man, he sure did a good bedside, wedding service. Then by definition, it's like, isn't it? It's kind of sad that you and I are gloating, or that we're proud of ourselves, or that we're thinking how awesome we are, or what great things we're doing for the Lord. And the Lord's like, wow, I'm still working on you guys. When will you learn that moment that you say, because if you think about over and over again, the people of Israel, he kept trying to tell them, I fight your battles, I fight your battles, I fight your battles. So he would do tricks like, no, your army's too big. Because if you won right now, you'd say it was you, right? And
Right,
he's
right,
always doing that.
exactly.
And they're like, oh, we'll take our spears, and this will be our strategy. He's like, no, you're going to walk around 7 times, and you're going to blow trumpets and stuff like that. He's just always constantly saying, I have to constantly remind you that to whatever extent you thought that you, because you're smart, or because you know the Bible better, or because you're hot stuff, that defeats the entire purpose of what I'm up to. Because I always want people to go, wow, God was in the room. God showed up.
That's right.
And then over time, we do learn that there are a few humble servants of his who are like, no, I'm really not patting myself on the back. You mentioned being present, or, just your presence is part of the participation. But then beyond that, usually it's a lot of like getting out of the way. Like, how do you get out of the way and just constantly divert the attention to yourself and say, no, it's the Lord, it's the Lord, it's the Lord. Because he says he does like that credit, because that makes people go, wait, the Lord is alive and well. He is interacting with us human beings. He is loving and good. And he does speak to us even in the messiness of the lives that we have today. He wants to be there, and he wants to communicate us, and he wants to let his messages be known.
Well, back to your question, there is a guy that is a part of this men's group, and he's been in it for, if I was to guess, I would say 3 or 4 years. But when it first started out, he didn't ever say much, didn't add a lot of comments or anything. And we were talking about that very thing recently, is God is going to call us to do things that we go, hey, you got the wrong guy. I can't do that. I don't have the ability to do it. And that's exactly when God can work in your life, because you've said, okay, I can't do it. And then he goes, okay, I'm going to do it through you. And the steps that I've seen this guy take, not just from being more vocal in the group, but in his own personal life, I would have never thought he had taken a test to be a finance counselor, a part of a company, and I would have never thought he would step up to do that. So, sometimes we don't realize, that God is doing some amazing things in some people, because we don't hardly see any results. We don't see any changes, but there's a lot of changes. And when we get a chance to see it, we're like, yes, we're so excited. But a lot of times we don't, So we just go, you know what, God, it's your job, it's your work, you just asked me to do my part, and I did. Yeah. So sometimes we're just seed sowers. Sometimes we're watering it. We never know where we come in on it. But the important thing is that we allow him to get us out of our comfort zone and do what he's called us to do, and not fall back on it. Well, I can't do it. It's not me. Congratulations. You just got your certificate for having God work in your life.
Yeah, it's true.
Because that's when he works, When I can think of times when I finally went to the Lord with something. I tried to figure it out, do it finally, and it's like, okay, now I can work. Now I can work in your life, because you've just come to me and say, God, I need you to do this.
Yeah.
Because before, guess who was trying to figure it out? Guess who was trying to manipulate the situation or make it work out? Well, it was me. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't him, it was me. So I think when we get to that point that we go, God first, I'm going to go to you first. I'm going to look at you for wisdom. then that makes a lot of difference.
That's a great word for all three of our listeners out there that, like how you and I measure progress. It's like, well, there's days on end and I'm not sure. I just have to be confident the Lord's taking it somewhere. I don't see measurable progress. Again,
That's
we're
right.
Americans, we're big on metrics. We always have to measure everything. Good Lord help us. And that person might not see progress. So they might be getting discouraged because they're like, Don, I've been at the IHOP for 2 years. I see nothing. I'm not getting anywhere. They may or may not recognize the growth.
Yes.
And you and I, and sometimes on the outside, we might not recognize the growth. But that's really not the point, is it? It's that the Lord has these folks on a trajectory. He has you and I on a trajectory. And so it is more about that patiently running the marathon for the long haul. And instead of grasping for those quick, easy wins to say, yes, it was his first week at IHOP, and now he wants to replace Billy Graham, and yada, yada. And you're like, that's going to sound cool. You should definitely create your own podcast based on that. I mean, that's sounds pretty cool. But most of life, the Lord's like, yeah, I can do it that way if I want to. But I tend to do more things like I patiently grow children. And at times you're like, I don't think this kid's getting it. Like, I don't see any hope. There's no progress.
True.
But the Lord's like, oh no, they're soaking it up like a sponge. Even when you think they've taken 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, he's like, oh yeah, this is the growth path I have them on. So I like that. And I hope that's encouraging to people out there to just, for those of you who are in something and you feel like, I thought there would be cool, measurable, awesome wins every week. And the Lord's like, well, sometimes you get that. Sometimes you don't. But just be faithful, be present, and recognize that it's the Lord's work. It's not your work.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you don't have the freedom to give up or quit.
That's true.
It's not your job to quit because it's the Lord's work all along.
It's funny because as we're talking about this, like I vividly remember when my wife and I first started coming to our church, and it was a Wednesday night practice. Annie and I had just gotten on the worship team, and the youth group is getting ready to do their thing. And I was like, man, I'm so happy that I am not affiliated with the youth group at all. Like it's like a time gone by. I'm glad I'm in a different stage of life.
That is funny.
And knowing me, I was like, I'm in a better stage of life. And then not like 8 months later.
Yeah, that's right.
I get this phone call like, hey, we are looking for a youth director role, and we know because at that point I had lost my job and I was doing something on the side and I was looking for something, and I've always loved ministry. But someone says, oh yeah, so we're looking for a youth director role for our church. Like, oh no, you mean the one 8 months ago I said I'm glad I'm not a part of? Now I'm in charge of it? and so I did it for 2 years.
and see, Don, this is part of the joys that the Lord brings sages and the silver foxes of the world, is that I remember that Thomas before, and then the Thomas during, and then the Thomas since. So that's why I laugh at that story, because I'm like, yep, we really should have known the day that in your mind you thought, thank you, I'm above the fray.
Don't have to deal with them anymore.
That the Lord,
oh yeah,
the Lord
I got something for you.
The Lord was instantly going to say, welcome to their fray. Which, by the way, total side note on those who might be thinking about youth ministry and involving yourselves in the lives of students at all. What happens for a lot of us when we see youth, we thank the Lord I'm past that, because it is a tough moment. It's a painful memories or whatever. It's like, basically you're saying to yourself, now that I've survived middle school, which is the most horrendous era of life, I don't ever want to go back and revisit it. And there needs to be some brave people who are like, you know what? That's not enough. So it goes kind of like this. A, you survived middle school yourself. B, you thank the Lord that you survived it. But then C, the next level of maturity is you're willing to go back and revisit that very difficult, challenging period, which we call youth. And it is topsy-turvy, and it's full of heartache and, broken hearts and all that crazy stuff. but it is almost like a maturity barometer, like to be willing to go back into that fray.
Yeah.
Because humanly speaking, your own natural person, you're like, I'm so glad I don't have that drama anymore. I'm so glad I made it myself. And the Lord goes, okay, now that you're done with your celebration dance, I was wondering, would you be willing to step back into that hurt? That teenage boy who doesn't have a father figure, that these young ladies who don't have people who don't objectify them constantly, would you be willing to step back into that world? That's where your best youth workers come from, right? Is the ones who are they don't view it as, well, this will be fun. They're like, oh no, this will be walking alongside some painful times of life.
That's right. Well, I do have more of a in practice question. So, and I'll give a disclaimer. So the question is, what are some practical little decisions that we can start thinking about making or start making today that will help us in our day-to-day life? And so I'll say like prayer, reading the Bible, seeking mentorship. We're going to say that those are given. Like you should be seeking like the people in your community to seek advice and guidance and counsel. Many people like Don. There's a Don in your life somewhere. You got to find them.
Standard building blocks.
Yes. So we're going
Don't
to say
try to
that's
assemble a spiritual life without those.
That's right. So we're going to say those are the prerequisites. What are some other little choices that you think we could be making in order to have that life that's fulfilling, burdenless, and for Christ?
Well, I remember a very wise man named Solomon that wrote in Proverbs, and he said, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will guide your path. And something about not being wise in your own eyes. Decision making, how many times do we make decisions and we go, God, I got this one. I'll get to you on the big ones,
Right.
but I got this. I mean, I understand what's going on here, and we lean on our own understanding. There's a saying that's been around a long time because it was around when I was young, and it's called follow your heart. And follow your heart may be the worst advice anybody could ever give you, no matter what the subject is. It's often got to do with love. Well, just follow your heart on
What does
it.
your heart tell you?
And you'll be divorced in 5 years if you just follow your heart.
But if it's something I desire, Don, surely it could be good in the end, right? The human heart is got a funny little way of playing tricks on us.
Oh, for sure.
Left to its own devices, it could take us down any path. Who knows where it takes us?
Well, our heart is this. It is what's best for me, what's in it for me. Do I want to do this? Is it going to be pleasurable? It's all self-centered. So when you say your heart, you're saying, hey, all the things you want, no matter the parameters of who it's going to affect, but what's best for you, what's going to work for you, And if we don't go to God with the little things, we'll have to go to him with the big things because we will have screwed up on the little things.
Interesting.
So, what you were talking about, the decision-making process, are we checking in with him? Are we also checking with other people? You mentioned that as a holistic type thing, but I don't think we think of it as on a decision-making basis, until we think it's something big, and then we're like, hey, Lord, it's a big one. It's a big one. I'm coming to you. And he goes, by the way, I work on little ones too.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
you go, really? Okay, well, and what you said earlier, you never wake up one morning and go, man, I'm going to make some really, really screwed up decisions today. You don't do that.
Yeah.
But what happens is the accumulation of these decisions that you made prior to that morning that you wake up could often lead you to that one that you thought you'd never do, which is what you mentioned earlier. You said 3 decisions, could be 3,000 decisions, but they're all little. They're all little. I forgot what the number is, but somebody said we make in the thousands of decisions every day, you know? And I go, what do you mean? You know, well, is the temperature right in the shower? Maybe I need to turn it up a little bit more. Should I shampoo my hair today? Or, well, I ain't got much to shampoo, so I ain't worried about it.
Can I trust bubbly water? Or is this some freakish thing they're introducing to me?
So, I mean, all those are decisions. And yes, I don't think we have to go to God and go, God, hey, is the water warm enough in here or should I bump it up? But there's other decisions that we make.
Yeah.
A lot of times in the business world, we're making decisions that affect our relationships. And how are we going to make that decision? Are we going to make that decision based on, hey, this is what works best for me? Are we going to do what Jesus would do and say, what's best for them? That is where the rubber meets the road, is when we choose his way over our way.
Well, I love all of that. And I catch myself maybe realizing I identify with follow your heart a little more than I thought I did. Simply because, and I know for anyone listening who is a strong advocate of that, then maybe we can relate to each other on this. Because in a lot of ways, I feel
you can
like
commiserate together.
That's right. Because a lot of ways, I think
all you follow your heart people out there, we all fall for that trick. Don's just pointing out the fact that don't stay there very long. Get out of there as soon as you can.
And to your point, I just think like, well, in my mind, why would I ever want to hurt somebody? Why would my heart ever tell me to do something that harms another person or something that is not in everyone's best interest? Why would I not want that? And like that's my ethos in a sense. But then in practice, it's like, well, I have to make this minor decision. Am I going to try to catch this red light? Or am I going to stop? Or am I going to wait until so if I go ahead and just make that turn because I really want to catch the light so I can get to work on time. Yeah. And turns out I actually just cut someone else off. And it's like, okay, well, you didn't think you wanted to hurt somebody, but you did because you chose not to do probably the most prudent thing and just, wait at the red light. And you can even back it up further. Well, maybe if you had not press the snooze one last time, you wouldn't be in this scenario in the first place.
Why not leave 5 minutes earlier than you thought you had to?
That's right. So
why do we leave when we have to?
My heart told me I just needed a couple of more minutes, and that led to this and to that. And those are very small examples.
Exactly. But they actually led to what you actually did.
Yeah.
And which you would go, that probably wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done.
Yeah, that's good.
Cutting that person off, much less going through the light when it was orange.
Right.
I think that's a huge, if you're going to call it the other building block, the missing building block. That's what Don mentioned is a huge one. The whole acknowledge the Lord's ways, and it is all intertwined because it involves humility, it involves being around other people, and even let's reference back to your IHOP group. So let's say there was one of the younger guys, and he's in business, and he's thinking about taking on a business partner, and he's in the IHOP group. But he's like, yeah, but at IHOP we don't cover these things. And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, hey guys, what if his approach was, hey guys, pray with me, talk with me. I'm thinking about taking on this business partner, and I'm not confident in me. The human foolish part of me is overconfident in me, but I'm learning. Take a deep breath. What do y'all think?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, think about how you could still have disaster. I'm not saying there's anything foolproof on this planet, but I can think of about 20 different angles that would be covered that would be so much different. I mean, one guy over here, it could be that someone in the group is like, yeah, I've seen him when you weren't looking, and I see a different dude than you see. I think he's been dating you. He puts his best foot forward with you because you're going to bring money to the business partnership.
Right.
When he saw me, I was just bussing tables at the country club, and he treats me like doggy doo-doo. Oh, really? Interesting. Well, yeah, you might have wanted to ask around a little bit. And then other things, even little things like you might have somebody else at the table who are like, yeah, I have been foolish in asking business partners in my lifetime. True confession. And it's like, I wish I would have talked about this before we joined the partnership. I wished I would have thought about, we're being yoked together financially here. What does that look like? So yeah, just think about how foolish that as one individual, we're going to think that we're so awesome. We're going to think of a million different angles. What about asking your wife to pray with you about this? Oh yeah, she sees a lot of things that you're not paying attention to, right? And she's like, yes, honey, I will pray with you, but I got to warn you. I think we're praying up a hill on this one. I can tell you right now. And you're like, oh, really? I thought he was a great guy. Yeah, I know you do, because it's a dude with a dude relationship.
That's right.
Y'all
That's
bluff
right.
each other all the time. But yeah, so I love how those two playing together. The idea of Solomon is saying, do you think you as an individual and your own supreme wisdom will know all, see all, and be all? Or are you willing to say, no, the Lord, that's his perspective. He sees all. And he's inviting me to take on his eyes, but I'm really far removed from it in my own flesh.
Right.
There's several things I got to do to come alongside him. How does he see? And there's so many little decisions, and they can become big ones.
Huh. Yeah, I guess as I'm processing this, I'm thinking, okay, so what does it mean to not lean on your own understanding? And just like you guys said, it's like, well, you have to first acknowledge that decisions shouldn't be made in a silo and on their own on an
There you
island.
go.
You need to first acknowledge that, hey, you know what? I actually probably don't know the best answer to this problem. And certainly when it comes to like the heat on a shower, sometimes we might not know, like it might actually burn ourselves, but typically that's the pretty safe bet. But certainly, like, hey, I'm thinking about whether it's someone who's asking you about your marriage. Hey, how's this going? How's this going? Hey, am I wrong? Like we're having this like kind of like playful debate, but I actually kind of care about this. What do you think? Like, so looking for outward perspective, whether it's through another believing brother or sister, but then also, okay, Lord, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray with you. I'm going to have a conversation with you. What do you think about this, God? And then certainly there's wisdom to be gleaned from Scripture. So by putting that in practice, not leaning on your own understanding, is first the mindset of, if I'm someone who didn't believe I had all the answers, then what would that person do? And I suppose that person would seek counsel from those metrics. Does that sound like a fair synopsis?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I also feel like Don and folks like him, when you take the risk and the investment to meet with some guys at IHOP consistently, you are doing that for their sake, but then you also are a recipient of lots of wisdom, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not, I think it would be a misunderstanding to go, well, listen, guys, I want to paint this scenario, what IHOP looks like. Don is the wise, perfect sage, and he has all answers to all things. And then there's these little pawns, that they're also at the table. It's like, well, no, when we get to the table, I'm learning from them and they're learning from me. I mean, there's a brotherhood that's going on, and I'm trusting them with my life, and they're trusting me with theirs, and they know what decisions I got coming up, and they know that I'm in a season right now. I'm a little bummed. I got let go from my last job, and I got to look for my new assignment, and I'm making decisions about my new supervisor wants me to travel further, and I'm like, gosh, can I do that and maintain a sanity in my home life? And so, yeah, I am a sage in some ways, but also I'm a sage who's still learning, and I'm open to learning from any of you at this table, because it could be a brand new Christian who's 20 years old, and they might even just simply ask me a question. Don, can you really travel 90 hours a week and still stay in good touch with your spouse? And you're like, dang it, son, that's a good question, because I think you might be hitting on something there.
You've been talking to God.
or my wife.
Yeah.
Did my wife text you to ask that question?
Yeah.
But I do think that that's part of God's, the way he provides. So oftentimes we say we're doing this to help this person or this group of people or these youth. And then in the end, the Lord's like, actually, Thomas, I have you on a spiritual growth track.
That's right.
And you seeking to help them is actually going to bless you more than you realize. And in Don's case, I'm certainly hoping that some of his best memories in life are, yep, it's not easy, but I set the alarm clock. I make sure I'm there at IHOP at 7 a.m. And some of these knuckleheads who I thought, man, this is going to be a tough case. But I learned so much from that guy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that you want to do in any small group is you want people to be able to be transparent, to be willing to say, pray for me about this. Because guess what? You got to set your pride aside when you say, I need you to pray for me about this. When you say, hey, this is going on in my life and it's tough right now.
Yeah.
When people can get to that point in a small group, then you're going to see people grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to see people grow a lot. And here's the other thing, and I tell guys this. I said, look, unless someone in this group says, hey, you can tell everybody to pray about this, don't share it.
There you go.
Don't share it.
Safe place.
You pray for it, yes, but you don't go out there going, hey, let me tell you what they said. I'm just saying this so you'll pray for them. No, you are a gossip, okay? You're a gossip. And so here's what I do know is one person that tells you something in private and you share and it ever gets back to them, the trust factor is gone.
Yeah.
It is
so true.
gone.
So
and
true.
the chances of you winning it back are not too good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
It's very hard. So I default to this. Like sometimes my wife will say, you knew this? And I go, I said I wouldn't tell anybody. You are a somebody. In fact, you are my body.
Thomas may have heard my wife say the same thing. This is an ongoing thing. And God bless all of us in our different perspectives. But I had a youth group 1,000 years ago, and they call me the Vault to this day because they're like, they know I didn't tell nobody. And actually, it is a bit of the litmus test because they'll be like, well, they'll go to my wife and they'll say, well, that thing that I talked to Robert about, she will be mad at me, and that's fine. That's her perspective. She will be mad at me because I won't say, but I'm like, no, I don't let my left hand talk to my right hand about it. Like it's not going to happen. And I don't go, well, I don't have like the different compartmentalizations. If somebody's going to harm themselves, then you're like, well, for your own good, you're about to commit suicide, and I have to step in.
Right.
And then I also know, why would you have told me unless you wanted me to do something about that? That's the other thing you need to do.
Yeah.
But outside of you have to be Baker acted because you're about to jump in front of a car or something like that, or you did harm a minor, or you were sexually inappropriate with a minor.
Right.
Now I have
There
an
are
obligation.
limits.
Right.
But outside of that, I don't. And it does go to the point where if I honestly, pregnancies are a big part of that. So often she'll be like, well, how long have you known that they were pregnant? And I was like, well, I know, but that doesn't mean that they said that they wanted the world to know. So
Sure.
it's not my place to share their news on their behalf. So, but Don, you're so right, is that we've all been burnt in those safe places before.
That's right.
And that's why it takes a little extra of maturity to go, no, listen, I'm going to be pretty stringent on this. And then in the end, everybody feels blessed because they're like, you know what? I've had a lot of under the guise of prayer time, it was gossipy. And it's like, yep, we got enough prayer force amongst the 3 of us at IHOP, 4 of us at IHOP today. We don't need to be sharing with anybody else. What happens at IHOP stays at IHOP. And when you can have that safe space, then we are able to be more vulnerable with one another. And we are able to be more like what King Solomon was getting at. Right. We're able to be humble and say, you know what? I don't know it all. I need to listen to the Lord. And one of his favorite ways to share is through his word, through other brothers and sisters in Christ. Mm-hmm. And if I don't have a safe space amongst some of them, then I am left to my own devices. And I am going to have to go through life as if I am my own little king under my kingdom, and I'm trying to figure this out. So creating safe places, it's a lost science and a lost art. There's very few that are good at it and are determined enough to do it. But obviously that's a huge need for people out there, that when we think of church family at its really basic definition is This is a safe group that I can be myself in. If I'm struggling, I'm allowed to say I'm struggling. And if I'm celebrating, I'm allowed to celebrate. We're celebrating together.
right.
We
That's
share
right.
each other's
That's right.
joys.
That's right.
And
And that's what we need. We need people in our lives that we can do that with. And here's the truth. A lot of people don't have somebody they can do that with.
they don't.
That's so
That's
true.
right.
You know, I mean, a lot of people are lonely. We don't know they're lonely. They seem to be surrounded by a lot of people, but they have nobody that they can really share their life with.
Yeah.
You got to have a best friend for that, or somebody that you can trust. And if there's a big need for men today, they need that.
Yeah.
They need that person in their life. Hopefully, in a mentor type role where they're sharing about the Lord with them. But, you know, a lot of guys choose the wrong people and they listen to them and then they wonder, how did I ever get here?
Yeah.
And then you go, well, where do you want me to start? You know?
Well, in defense of a Sunday morning gathering where there's 30 or more people, let alone 300 or 3,000, it's unfair to expect that in that venue that you're going to get that.
That's right. That's right.
And so somebody might say, well, listen, Don, I tried that Christianity thing. I was popping in. I would show up by the third song and slip out before, the closing and whatever. And it's like, there's zero opportunity for that in that environment.
Yeah,
what are you talking about?
When you're rushing out the door,
You might want to make a bit more of an investment, right? That's like saying, you showed up at the Buck Stadium and you feel fit like a football player. You're like, no, seriously, you bought a scalp ticket last minute and sat on the back row, and you're upset because you're not fit like these guys on the field. So, anybody out there in defense of your local church, I would say, you don't expect or demand or be upset that in that large of a gathering, you don't have a safe, trusted, the things that we're talking about.
Right.
It's like, but, and also don't be mad that your pastor hasn't organized such, because it is as simple as, well, why don't you show up? Here's a crazy thought: show up to church at least 2 minutes early. I don't want to ruffle your world any, but show up slightly early. Be hanging out in the foyer. Ask people how they're doing. Genuinely listen for their answers, and then say, "Hey, I was thinking about getting together at IHOP this Thursday at 7 a.m. You want to get together? And be that person who proactively makes that happen.
That's right.
Don't be the person who's like, well, dang, I'm kind of upset because the pastor hasn't organized IHOP meetings. He may or may not have the energy to participate in that, but you might be in a situation where you're mad at somebody else for not starting that.
Right.
And hopefully, I hope that the encouragement you hear from someone like Don would be, listen, it ain't rocket surgery that we're asking you to do. It's a simplicity of presence in the lives of others.
I got one question. I thought it was rocket science.
No, it's advanced to rocket surgery. Yes.
I built my whole life on rocket science,
thought it was
and
science.
now you rocked my world.
It's a whole new
I
level
thought it was
now.
science rocket.
You've rocked his world too.
yeah.
So listen, everything was based on that.
But yeah, if you're mad at your local church or you're mad at somebody else for not doing that, then hopefully you see that. Well, we're not saying you had to have graduated seminary. We're not saying you have to have all the answers. In fact, you're better off not having all the answers. We'd like you to show up at IHOP with somewhat of a humble spirit, but just the willingness to reach out to other people and say, you know what? There's power when God's people get together, probably in a smaller grouping, because in a smaller grouping, you can have more of a trusted grouping. And if I don't have that, Lord, help that to be so. And if I am the one that has to do something about that, kind of take a risk, put myself out there, commit some time to patiently seek that out, I bet the Lord will show you that there's a lot of people out there who need that. And there's probably some other guy at your local church who's thinking, yeah, I always wanted to do that, but I was too scared to know how to start. And you're like, well, all right, well, we're two scared brothers. We'll just start it together and see where it goes.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I like that. Guys, I feel like this is a conversation that go for a long time. There's so many thoughts in my brain. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Sometimes when you were down, you got to land the plane.
Yeah,
because you realize there's more. There's more where that came from.
But I think we got the good nuggets. Are you happy?
Yeah. Oh gosh, over here thrilled to death. Going back to another subject about the rocket science.
Yeah, rocket science, rocket surgery.
Well, the other day my world got rocked too because I always thought it was French benefits, and they said no, it's fringe benefits. I go no.
The benefits of being
I
French.
based my whole career on French
yes.
benefits.
Yes.
I got nothing.
The French benefits of working for this company. Your boss sold you on that, and you're like, I'm still waiting for him.
I'm still like I haven't got a single ticket for France yet.
Those French, they really got those benefits figured out.
No benefits. Okay.
Guys, thank you so much. To those watching and listening, thank you for hanging out with us. Parting words. Go find people to hang out with in your community, and don't do it alone.
Be more like Don.
Be more like Don. Go find a Don where you're at. Peace.